on BBC One.
Now at 10 o'clock, the BBC News with Hugh Edwards in West London.
Tonight at 10, there's to be a full public inquiry into the fire that destroyed Grenfell Tower, this residential block in West London. So far, the number of dead stands at 17, but many people are still missing, and the number could rise significantly as the recovery work continues.
We know there will be more. It's the upper floors that will be more challenging, and we'll need some additional shoring for us to be able to get in there. The size of this building, it could take weeks. I want to be realistic, this is a very long process.
The first victim has been named as Mohammed Al-Hajali, a Syrian refugee studying engineering, whose brother was rescued from the same flat by the fire brigade.
I said, why you didn't come? They brought us outside. I thought you are with us. He said, no one brought me outside. He said, why you left me?
Dozens of people are still listed as missing, as appeals are made by families and friends for information.
Jessica's a 12-year-old vibrant young girl who's going to be turning 13 next month. She's a lovely little girl with a bubbly personality, and we're just worried and concerned about her. We just want her home.
In the local community, the profound shock and grief are still evident, but there's growing anger and a demand for answers.
At the moment we're grieving, but there's a public anger underneath, and we do want to see someone held accountable for this.
The Prime Minister made a private visit to the scene and later announced the public inquiry into the disaster.
We need to know what happened. We need to have an explanation of this. We owe that to the families, to the people who have lost loved ones, friends, and the homes in which they lived.
And we'll be reporting on the work of the firefighters and what they've had to face in the past 48 hours.
Coming up in Sports Day later in the hour on BBC News, India have reached the ICC Champions Trophy final after thrashing Bangladesh. They're going to meet Pakistan in Sunday's final.
Good evening from West London, where the Prime Minister came earlier today to see the devastation caused by the fire at Grenfell Tower and then promised a full public inquiry into what happened. The fire, which destroyed this residential housing block in the early hours of yesterday morning, spread very quickly, and the number of dead confirmed so far is 17, though that figure is expected to rise. The emergency services say it'll take weeks to complete a full search of this building. And there's a sense of growing anger in the local community about warnings being ignored. Our first report, the latest on the tower block fire, is by our home editor Mark Easton, a warning there are some distressing details in his report.
Slowly, inch by painstaking inch, fire officers continue their grim and dangerous work. Amid the soot-blackened shell of what was once home to hundreds, are some who didn't make it out. Exactly how many we don't know, but police today said they hoped the final death toll would not be in 3 figures. The scale of this tragedy is yet to become clear.
Sadly, I can confirm that the number of people that have died is now 17. We do believe that that number will sadly increase. There are 37 people receiving treatment, of which 17 are still in critical care.
The brother of these 2 Syrians was one of those who lost his life. Mohammed Al-Hajali was an engineering student seeking a better life in Britain. Omar was with him as firemen tried to evacuate the blazing building, but the pair got separated.
And I looked behind me, I didn't see my brother. I said, my brother, where is he? They were ignoring downstairs. Then I went outside. I called him, he said, where are you? He said, I'm in the flat. I said, why you didn't come? They brought us outside. I thought you are with us. He said, no one brought me outside. He said, why you left me? said, why? I didn't leave. I said they took him outside with me. They didn't. They left him.
Younger brother Hashem continued to talk to Mohammed on his mobile phone until there was no reply.
He said, please tell Mom to pray for me, and he was telling me to put Quran for him. He said, are you happy with me? Are you happy about me? Do you have any problem with me? I said, no, who has a problem with you? You have the sweetheart, Muhammad. You will make it out. And then he said, he was speaking slowly, and then he said, I can't.
He said, I cannot breathe. I'm dying. Why they left me? Why they...
Relatives of 5-year-old Isaac Paulos confirmed today that the little boy was among those who died in the fire. The agony of a wounded neighbourhood is written on a wall, the desperation of people searching for family and friends, prayers and solace from near and far. For the last 2 days, Jason Garcia's been searching for his 12-year-old cousin, Jessica Urbano.
We feel helpless, really. All we're hoping is that if we're putting up posters, sharing her image on social media and talking to people like yourself, that maybe someone with information will get in touch with us.
Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come.
This evening, Jessica's parents and friends gathered together in a community that is craving answers but complains of delays and evasion.
At the moment we're grieving, but there's a public anger underneath, and we do want to see someone held accountable for this.
The love and generosity that's poured into North Kensington in the last couple of days cannot make up for the numbing sense of loss. The Prime Minister made a private visit to the scene today, speaking to emergency workers before announcing there will be a full public inquiry into what went wrong.
When I spoke to the emergency services, they told me that this fire, the way this fire progressed, how it took hold of this building, was rapid, it was ferocious, and it was unexpected.
We have to get to the bottom of this. The truth has got to come out, and it will.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn also went to North Kensington, insisting he would speak up for the community. Shock and grief are being joined by outrage and anger. The questions are raining down, rather like the charred lumps of cladding, which locals are holding up as possible evidence that people were housed in a preventable death trap. This tower block fire looks just like North Kensington.
They came in and said, get out, evacuate now.
But it was 3 years ago in Melbourne, Australia. And the similarities don't stop there.
Those of us that have been around for 30 years or more have never seen a fire develop in this way.
In my 29 years in the London Fire Brigade, I have never seen a fire of this nature, and I have seen many high-rise fires.
Building in Melbourne's
Attention in Australia focused on the use of cheaper but less fire-resistant plastic fibre-backed cladding rather than mineral fibre-backed. The same distinctions being made about Grenfell Tower, although authorities insist building regulations were followed. London Mayor Sadiq Khan was heckled by a small group of people on a visit to Grenfell Tower today.
Tell me what he's going to say. I don't want to hear this rubbish.
Feelings are running high.
Understandably, the residents are very angry and concerned and have genuine questions that demand answers. And so, whereas
someone needs to be held accountable.
Where, of course, we won't.
Death could have been prevented.
The concerns are not just about what went wrong in North Kensington. They're also about what could go wrong in thousands of tower blocks across Britain. Residents at Trellick Tower, who can see Grenfell Tower from their balconies, now have a constant and disturbing reminder of the risks of high-rise living. Mark Easton, BBC News, North Kensington.
Well, there were hundreds of people in this building when the fire started, and many families are waiting anxiously for news about their loved ones, posting notices locally appealing for information. The police warned today that they may never be able to identify all of those who died. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning reports now on the family's search for relatives, and you may find some of the details in the report upsetting.
Mohammed Hakim fears he's lost everyone. His mother, father, 2 brothers and sister. All his extended family supporting him now rushed to the fire when the calls of panic came.
I spoke to her and the very last few words that she said to me was, "Please forgive me if I've said anything to upset you or hurt you. I don't think we're going to make it out of the building."
They were supposed to be celebrating next month. His sister Husna was getting married, but the entire Mir family were trapped on the 17th floor.
They were reciting like du'as from the Quran, and it was just heartbreaking, and then it just cut out. And then I rang Husna. She was like, "Oh, we're not going to make it, we can't make it, we can see flames under the door. I can see flames under the door." And I kept saying, try and put things under the door to stop the smoke coming in and get low as you can and open the windows. Someone's going to come, call the fire brigade, do something. And then she stopped talking. And all I could hear was this crackling noise in the background because the phone was still on, but she wasn't saying anything. Not knowing is killing me. I really need to find out where they are.
The family stood helpless outside, unable to rescue them.
This is the worst thing I will remember in my life. I saw my uncle from the 17th floor. He opened the window and he kept shouting, "Please help us, get us out." And he was saying Allah's name and all this. And I kept looking at his helpless.
Mohammed, it must be extremely difficult just not knowing.
Not losing one member of my family, but losing all five, the whole entire family. I don't have my parents anymore, and you only get one set of parents in this world, and I had 3 siblings. They're all gone in the space of a couple of hours after leaving their house. They're all gone. And no one wants to give us any information about where their whereabouts are, if they're still within the building or not.
They still have hope, but feel bereft of help. Adele Chowie is another relative deep in grief and frustration. Baby Lena Belkadi, just 6 months old, is missing. Along with her mum Farah and her dad Omar. They eventually found 2 of the baby's sisters in hospital.
We cajoled and begged a nurse to go upstairs, and after 10 minutes one of them offered to do so and came down and told us they had a child that matched the description. Did we want to come up and have a look? We found one of the children there, the younger, and my brother's looking around and he's staring at another bed and asks Farah's older sister to have a look, and Farah's older sister says that's the other child, that's the older one, and they were beds apart and no one in authority was making any effort to identify them.
So you've had to do this all yourself?
We've had to do it ourselves.
So many families here are looking, hoping, dreading the news that may come. Lucy Manning, BBC News, West London.
Well, throughout the day, people living in this community in North Kensington have been expressing their anger, their deep frustration, demanding to know who would be held accountable ultimately for this tragedy, while the search for missing relatives and friends continued. Our correspondent Fergus Walsh reports now on those still missing after the Grenfell Tower fire.
Hour by hour, the roll call of the missing and the dead lengthens. Friends and relatives desperate for information have posted photos and messages on social media. Many children are among those unaccounted for. 11-year-old Firdaus Qadir and his 13-year-old brother Yahya lived on the 20th floor with their parents and 6-year-old brother. All are missing. Fatima, Myrna and 3-year-old Zainab Shuker also lived on the 20th floor of Grenfell Tower with their parents and grandmother. Again, all 6 are missing. Berkti Haftam and her 12-year-old son Biruk lived on the 18th floor. Relatives say they've visited every hospital treating the casualties and got no word. Zainab Deen lived on the 14th floor with her 2-year-old son Jeremiah. She called her brother and said she'd been told to stay in her flat. Eventually, the phone cut out. Rania Ibrahim and her 2 daughters, 5-year-old Fatia and Hania, who's 3, were on the 23rd floor. The 30-year-old posted footage on social media from the smoke-filled landing before going back in her flat. Khadija Say, on the left, is a 24-year-old photographer whose work is on show at the Venice Biennale. She lived on the 20th floor with her mother, Mary Mendy. Both are missing. Gloria Trevisan, an architect, and her partner Marco Cotardi are from Italy. They'd only recently moved into a flat on the 23rd floor. They were unable to get out and called their relatives at 4 a.m. to say smoke was rising. A family lawyer said there is no hope of finding them alive. More names, more faces are still to come. Behind every picture there is a family, friends and loved ones, searching, hoping, and in some cases, already grieving.
Well, let's go straight to St Mary's Hospital in Paddington, short distance away from here. Fergus is there for us with an update on those being treated. What's the latest there, Fergus?
Well, tonight, Hugh, I can tell you that 30 patients are being treated across 4 hospitals. 15 of those are in critical care. All have been identified and their relatives are with them. Now, the main injury that's being treated is from breathing in smoke. That can cause inflammation of the airways, and in some cases it's so serious that the patients have been given a general anaesthetic and been put into what's known as an induced medical coma, and that gives time for their airway to heal. Another problem is carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, although that can be serious, by giving all the patients oxygen, that can be successfully treated. Hugh.
Fergus, thanks very much once again. Fergus Walsh there for us at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington. There is an emergency number for anyone concerned about relatives or friends. Let me remind you of that number again. The Metropolitan Police Casualty Bureau number 0800 0961 233. 0800 0961 233. And here in North Kensington with me is our home editor, Mark Easton. Mark, you've been talking to lots of people during the day and indeed this evening, because there is a sense that maybe the mood has changed slightly during the day. How do you sense it?
Well, I think as we've been reporting, I think that there is anger in the air, but also I think frustration right now at what many people see as a lack of coordination, a lack of organisation. There are people tonight sleeping on the floor on mattresses in a local sports centre. Now, the council say they have provided emergency temporary accommodation to 79 households. They've focused particularly on elderly people and families with young children. But there are hundreds, by some estimates, thousands of people who've been made homeless by this, not only from the tower behind us, but from other buildings which have had to be evacuated. Now, we're being told by the emergency services this tragedy, this affair is far from over. The process of going through that building, the harrowing job of identifying the bodies and so on, that's going to take not days, it's going to take weeks. And so I think we can say that this story is going to be dominating our news, it's going to be dominating our politics. It's going to be providing a black backdrop, I think, to our lives going into the summer.
Mark, thanks for now, and maybe we'll have another word before the end of the programme. Mark Easton there, Home Affairs editor. Well, let's talk a little more about the government response, the political context, if you like, because as we've heard, both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn visited this area today. And at Westminster, MPs questioned the Minister for Policing and the Fire Service, Nick Hurd. He described what happened here as a national tragedy. The Labour MP, David Lammy, one of whose friends is still missing in this area, called for a criminal investigation. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, reports on the political response.
In an emergency, who's in charge? The Prime Minister met firefighters who've given everything at Grenfell, but none of the families who've lost everything they have. She met volunteers on the ground, but returning to number 10, the focus today, getting help to those who need it.
The government stands ready to provide every assistance necessary to the emergency services and to the local authority. I know we've all heard absolutely heartbreaking, as I did this morning, heartbreaking stories of the people who were caught up in this terrible, terrible tragedy.
My friend's The Labour leader was on hand in a local church, hearing fears.
Someone has to be held accountable. someone has to be held responsible. We do not want this kicked into the long grass. We do not want the government to sort of hide this with some hollow platitude that lessons will be learnt.
And anger.
Give them hell. Give them absolute hell. They knew that that block was unsafe. They knew that.
You cannot allow people to live in a dangerous state, and that is a worry, obviously, but the resources have to be found, and we will demand and make sure those resources are found.
With worries for people who live in similar blocks and so much still unknown, MPs demanded a meeting with ministers.
When we talk about this as a tragedy, we're talking about it as though it's an act of God, but the truth is it wasn't some natural disaster. This is a man-made disaster, and we look to you both as ministers to leave no stone unturned in getting justice and getting to the bottom of this.
It's really important that there is utter clarity today about whether people should stay in their flats in the event of another horrific fire, which could happen this afternoon as we speak here, or whether they should leave.
I would like to see the Minister putting resources into the fire service to make sure they have the resources to do full inspections of all of our blocks across this country within the next week.
The government did promise all the survivors will get new homes near the tower.
We have to act and think as if it was our friends, our family, in that block. That I have to have that emotional connection with what's going on, because there is no room for cool, detached, plodding bureaucracy.
Yet only those who've lost their beds, their homes and their loved ones can ever truly know.
Well, let's go to Westminster tonight, and Laura is there for us. Laura, we've heard already about anger and resentment and frustration directed at some authorities and at government. How is that being seen at Westminster?
Well, Hugh, I think across Westminster, politicians are very well aware that that kind of sentiment may develop, and it may develop very fast. The government has, if you like, before it a very complicated to-do list. There are, of course, the immediate priorities. Make sure help is getting quickly to where it's needed most. Release extra cash for the council. Emergency funding has already been put in place. Thirdly, the government has, after calls from other parties, acted quickly to announce a full public inquiry. The Prime Minister wants that to get going pretty much without delay. But I think already here at Westminster there is a rather depressing sense that any inquiry beyond looking at the particularities of what actually happened is likely to reveal a picture of successive governments simply not really prepared to put enough political effort, time or energy into making sure that this kind of housing is up to scratch. Of course there are huge layers of regulations. Of course there are also different layers of accountability. Housing associations, the individual council, before you get to central government. But I think that in Westminster there is already that sentiment that ultimately a picture will be painted that politicians have for a long time just not paid enough attention to this kind of issue. For any government, this kind of big national tragedy is required to deal with huge sensitivity and huge nimbleness. But remember also, right now, this is an extremely fragile government. The state opening of Parliament is not even underway. Theresa May is only just days after a bruising political defeat. So the complexity of a situation like this is, of course, a huge political risk for Number 10 in particular. And while Theresa May's team believe that she made the decision not to visit residents and families of the victims of this tragedy, they think they made those decisions for the right reasons. They didn't want to get in the way. They wanted to allow the emergency effort to carry on unimpeded. And frankly, it's just not her style to have television cameras trailing her every move. But with the mood that seems to be developing, that decision could prove to be a miscalculation. Because events like this, Hugh, can require real displays of empathy rather than just a concentration of getting on with the job.
Laura, many thanks. Laura Kuenssberg there at Westminster. And as Laura was saying, the government says that the public inquiry will deal with all aspects of what happened. It insists that Downing Street completely understands the shock and anger felt by people. There are many questions outstanding for the local authority, for builders and subcontractors, as well as the company that managed this tower block. Our correspondent Tom Simons reports on the investigations that will take place into the causes of the fire and why it spread so rapidly.
Grenfell Tower showing its age a few years ago. It was built in the 1960s and recently it was refurbished. New cladding and windows were added, standard treatment given to towers all over the country. So why this? How did it start? Why did it spread so fast? It's clear something went badly wrong. Colin Todd wrote the guidelines councils use when considering fire safety in tower blocks.
I've been in fire safety for 41 years and never seen a fire of this nature in terms of speed of spread and extent of development. So investigators' first priority will be to find out how it managed to spread so quickly and without any containment.
These are the plans for the renovation of the tower. They include cladding panels and insulation fixed to its walls, part of a system of components designed to contain any fire. The panels don't necessarily have to be completely fireproof, but the system is supposed to slow down the spread of flames. The aftermath of the Grenfell fire suggests the opposite happened. Harley Facades is responsible for the cladding, its materials and its fitting. Was the work properly completed? The company says it's not aware of any link to the fire. Another company, Ryden, managed the project. It insists it met all the relevant safety standards. The Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation manages the tower. It submitted the planning application, which will be scrutinised closely. And the Borough Council owns the building. It agreed the planning application and was responsible for signing off the completed work. The council will be at the centre of various inquiries.
All the companies involved now face intense scrutiny of their work and of the specifications under which it was carried out. This is a family firm and staff here are said to be devastated by what's happened, but the promise is that they'll work closely with the various investigations.
The London Fire Brigade, today using a drone to examine the wreckage, is currently leading those inquiries. Its teams will have to work out the cause of the fire. One theory among residents is that a faulty fridge was the spark. If there's evidence of arson or wider negligence, the police will step in. There is a possibility companies could be prosecuted for manslaughter. But the government's announcement of a public inquiry places the Grenfell disaster alongside an event like Hillsborough. Then 96 died. Today the police said they hoped this time the number of lost lives would not reach 3 figures. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Well, the recently appointed Housing Minister, Alok Sharma, has said that the government started talking to local authorities and housing associations about how they will ensure that the homes they're responsible for are safe. But there are still questions about how ministers have responded to previous fires in tower blocks. Our science editor, David Shukman, has been looking at some of the safety issues that have been raised in the past and reports on the future of tower block safety.
The London fire has triggered concern right across the country. In Belfast, fire safety leaflets are being handed out by the Housing Authority. Suddenly, there's intense scrutiny of every detail of the arrangements to cope with a fire. There are now questions about safety in all tower blocks, but with a particular focus on the ones that have been fitted with cladding. And experts point to fires like this one in Southampton in 2010, where 2 firefighters died, and where the installation of sprinklers might have made all the difference.
People don't die in sprinkler buildings. A single death in a sprinkler building is a very, very extremely rare event anywhere in the world. A multiple death is almost unheard of.
One of many tragic aspects of this tower block disaster is that for years experts have warned of the dangers of fire. Back in 2013, a coroner called for sprinklers to be fitted to existing council tower blocks. A fire in South London had killed 6 people, but the recommendation wasn't followed, and sprinklers are usually only installed in new buildings. Next, having just one staircase, like in Grenfell Tower, has repeatedly been criticised as a hazard, limiting the chance for people to escape and for firefighters to get in. And there have long been concerns about cladding, the panels fitted outside the buildings. These are usually metal with a layer of insulating material. Back in 1991, the rules about them were tightened, but regulations do not require that the panels should never burn. And some critics say the current system of testing them doesn't go far enough. The cladding at Lakanal House in South London was judged to have intensified a blaze 8 years ago. 6 people died here. It was hoped back then that out of this tragedy would come a turning point, leading to safer conditions in all tower blocks. But promised reforms never happened, and the lawyer who represented the victims' families says at this time the authorities must respond, and quickly.
We do not want the same situation as in Lakanal House, where things dragged on and on and on, and then it just fell off the public agenda, and then the public inquiry didn't happen. It was only an inquest, and then nobody listened. This time, the government must listen, and maybe, as others have said, maybe heads need to roll too.
Tonight in North London, a tower block fitted with cladding by the same company, Rydon, that worked on Grenfell Tower. It said again today that it followed every building regulation. Even so, people here are worried.
We don't know what the cladding is made of, but everybody now is concerned and very paranoid since what's happened at the Grenfell Tower.
We are worried about what's going to happen to us as well. You know, last night even I can't sleep very well. I've been very, very shocking with my moms and my kids as well.
It may be that the horror at Grenfell Tower will bring real change, but this involves challenges that'll be expensive and controversial. Among them, getting more money to local councils, reviewing how towers are renovated, and overhauling the system of inspections. David Shookman, BBC News.
Well, as we've heard, the government has said that every family from Grenfell Tower will be rehoused somewhere in the local area. In the meantime, former residents have been staying in hotels and, as Mark Easton was telling us, in emergency accommodation at a sports centre in one instance. Local churches have been offering food and drink and clothing, but community groups say that so much has been given now that people should only donate if they see appeals for specific items. Our correspondent Elaine Dunkley has the latest on the community response.
From all over the country, donations are arriving. Boxes of food and clothing. This is the Al-Manar Mosque. Many have not slept since the fire destroyed homes.
We're working under an umbrella of humanity, which is absolutely amazing, and saying that communities do come together. And there were Muslim people donating to churches, and I was one of them. There were Christian people donating to, mosques, because knowing whatever is easier and closer. It's just a network of not races, not colours, and not anything, just us being humans.
Many people felt helpless as they watched the tower block on fire. Donating food and clothes is helping this community heal.
I'm from New York, and I lived in New York when the towers came down, and it was very reminiscent of that. And just generally, you want to help, you want to do whatever you can.
But as well as generosity, there is frustration that food and clothes are being left on the street.
We're trying to create a central base here.
Niles is a local resident. He's organised a sorting facility to take collections.
We don't want any bags left on the street that's been sent from people's hearts. I don't think people need to send so much stuff anymore, but people need to support the community in whatever capacity that they have. In the midst of this horror and destruction is a bit of beauty, you know? There's a bit of upliftment, there's a bit of seeing that we can, we have a lot of resources, human resources.
Please stop, just stop. Clothes are going here, food only is going here.
As more boxes arrive, those who are trying to help are feeling overwhelmed and say the council could do more to organise collections, volunteers and storage.
It's been a united front here, but I've got to say that the council sort of dragged their feet a lot, and they should have done a lot more. We're just common folk that's come to help, and there hasn't been any contingency plans, there hasn't been any strategies.
I've got a week off, and I'll just give my time to do what needs doing. But there are so many people here, just waiting for someone to tell me what to do.
The local authority says it is trying to manage donations, but says the priority is finding homes for vulnerable families.
How do you respond to the criticism from people around here that the council hasn't done enough to help?
Well, I'm very sorry that there is that criticism, because in fact we were very quick to set up 3 emergency centres around the tower. They are staffed by council staff who have expertise in looking after younger people, older people with particular needs, disabled people.
Tonight, most residents are in temporary accommodation. For now, there are enough provisions. What people need is a roof over their heads.
Every few minutes you will see an act of kindness here, despite the anger and despite the despair. People haven't just been donating boxes of food and clothing, people have also been offering emotional support, whether that's giving someone a hug or holding someone's hand. Earlier on this evening, hundreds of residents attended a vigil, and all day today people have been coming along here to this wall to leave messages. There are also flowers on the floor, and every bit of space on this wall there's a message to a loved one or to the people of this community. The writing on this wall is in so many different languages, and I suppose that very much reflects the multicultural nature of this area, and many different people from different faiths and different backgrounds coming together to express their grief. They've had to put up more boards. This now stretches all the way around the building and also along the fences so people can leave tributes here. This area has now become a shrine to a community trying to stay strong.
Elaine, thanks very much. Elaine Dunkley there for us with the latest on the tributes that are being left in the streets around this area in North Kensington. A little later, we'll be talking about the exceptional work of the firefighters in this area over the past 48 hours. That's in a few minutes' time, but let's join Clive now for the rest of the day's news.
Hugh, many thanks for that. Well, the annual Mansion House dinner in the City of London, which was due to take place this evening, has been cancelled as a result of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. The organisers made the decision shortly after the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, withdrew from the event, where he was expected to offer reassurances to businesses worried about the impact of Brexit. The Treasury says the Chancellor will address those issues at what it called a suitable time in the near future. Well, our economics editor Kamal Ahmed is here. Kamal, we were expecting a significant intervention from the Chancellor tonight on Brexit.
We were, Clive, but I think understandably the normal run of news events has been postponed given the events of the last 2 days. But as you say, the Treasury say the speech will happen when it's appropriate. And as you say as well, it was going to be a speech which maybe revealed a slightly softer tone towards the whole Brexit negotiations than the tone we heard before the referendum. We're told that the Brexit negotiations will start on Monday, despite the events of the last 48 hours. And so those negotiations will begin. And I'm sure that Mr. Hammond will make his speech in the next few days. Two significant announcements were made today about the economy. Firstly, that retail sales have slowed to their lowest level for 4 years, which shows that that income squeeze that people have been suffering because of higher inflation is really with us. And I think one other significant moment is that the bank, although it has held interest rates at the historic low levels that they've been at since the financial crisis, it was the closest votes on rising those interest rates that we've had for 10 years, just 5 votes to 3, very close. The suggestion being that interest rate rises because of rising inflation could be coming. Any rise will be limited and gradual, but the bank, I think, is signalling that those historic low interest rates could be coming to an end.
OK, Kamal, many thanks. Kamal Ahmed. Now, Theresa May has been meeting the main political parties of Northern Ireland at Downing Street to try to reassure them that a proposed deal between the Conservatives and the Democratic Unionists wouldn't affect the prospects of restoring power sharing at Stormont. The Prime Minister hopes to secure the support of the DUP to give her government a working majority in Parliament, but critics have warned any deal could create a conflict of interest, as the Good Friday Agreement commits the British government to demonstrate rigorous impartiality in its dealings with Northern Ireland's politicians. The owner of British Airways, IAG, says last month's computer failure, which left thousands of passengers stranded around the world, will cost the company around £80 million. More than 700 flights were cancelled over 3 days. IAG's chief executive, Willie Walsh, told the firm's annual general meeting it had been a dreadful experience for customers. A drug that can extend the life of patients with breast cancer has been approved for use on the NHS in England. Kadcyla had been deemed too expensive, but now an agreement has been reached with the manufacturer Roche. The NHS says provides a good deal for patients and taxpayers. Now, let's rejoin Hugh in West London. Hugh, over to you.
Clive, thanks. Well, throughout the day, more accounts have been shared of the exceptional bravery that's been seen here in recent days. More than 200 firefighters tackled the fire yesterday, entering this building while it was still burning, and then they did try their best to help those who were trapped. Their work isn't over. They're now involved in the recovery operation, and tonight we've spotted 1 or 2 firefighters in the building as we speak. Our correspondent Sarah Campbell reports on the firefighters and the impact this fire has had on them.
Hero! This guy, look at that, hero!
It's impossible to imagine how anyone would willingly run into this. But that's exactly what more than 200 firefighters did.
The main thing with this building on the night was the speed the fire moved from the bottom up to the top, and the thick black smoke that filled the air, that filled the building. They're real challenges for us. We've also got people, quite rightly, trying to get out of the building quickly as we're trying to get in.
Have you seen a fire like it?
I've never seen a fire on this scale in my whole career. No, I've seen lots of fires in the London Fire Brigade, but nothing on this scale.
Exhausted, having spent hours tackling a fire which has been described as unprecedented in its scale, and the work is far from over. Now comes the task of making the building safe enough to allow a thorough search and recovery.
You've had a chance to speak to some of those involved. How are they doing, if not physically, mentally?
I've spoken to quite a few people. They're okay. I think the main thing is that they're tired, but they are so keen to ensure that we complete the job. They were on duty again. A lot of them were on duty last night. Some will be on duty again tonight, and they want to come back. They want to come back and assist.
Thankfully, only a handful of firefighters received minor injuries. The mental scars from what they saw and heard may take much longer to heal.
People have coping mechanisms in all sorts of ways, and the most obvious one is the support of your colleagues who've been through similar experiences. But clearly, the scale of this and the sorts of horrors that people have seen means that they will need to be watched, and they'll need to be supported, and that will need professional support.
There is anger here, with many local people feeling let down by the authorities, but there's thanks too for those willing to put their lives on the line to save others.
Heroes. The heroes. They went in to try to save people in that. Everyone, they're heroes.
That was our correspondent Sarah Campbell reporting on the exceptional dedication and courage of the firefighters here in the past 48 hours. Mark Easton, our home editor, is with me once again. And Mark, throughout the day, people beginning to look at precisely what the technical requirements are in buildings and asking very searching questions about how this could have happened.
Indeed, the more we learn, the more questions there seem to be. Not least, here we are in one of the richest boroughs, in one of the richest cities, in one of the richest countries in the world, and yet hundreds of people are housed in a tower block that cannot withstand a small fire in one person's flat. And of course, it's hugely important that a building like that is there. It's supposed to be building regulations, there are supposed to be housing regulations. We believe that those are going to be enough to keep people safe, and the kind of people who are housed in there often are vulnerable. They're people with disabilities, they're elderly people, they're families with babies and young children. And we look to our local authorities, we look to our other agencies to ensure that those people are kept safe and that no corners are cut. And I think people are asking questions now. Can it be that safety was perhaps compromised in a drive for efficiency, for savings, for cutting red tape? Those are the questions the community is asking now, and I think they'll still be asking those questions in the days, the months, and quite probably the years to come.
Mark, many thanks again. Mark Easton there for us, our home editor. And that is all from West London, from North Kensington tonight. There is more coverage for you on the BBC News channel and on BBC News Online, constantly updated for you throughout the night as well. But here on BBC One, it is now time for the news where you are. Good night.